Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and have you ever made a puzzle quilt? Well, puzzle quilts can be made in various different ways. We can applique them, which means we can machine applique them or hand applique them. We can paper piece them, so we have little pieces to make that circular shape, or we can piece them. So we're not getting an exact circle, but it gives us that puzzle look. Well, I sort of have a Sew Very Easy way, and that sort of combines applique, but we're going to machine it and quilt it and applique it and get it all done as we go. And the great part is this takes 5-inch squares of fabric. So we're going to be able to use some charm packs or our own cut 5-inch squares. So let's start and look at how this quilt is going to be put together. It really is going to be as simple as sewing some squares together. These 5-inch squares are going to be turned into puzzle pieces. So we will need our little puzzle piece ends. So those puzzle piece ends do need to match that fabric. For simplicity, it really is easier if we have on opposite sides our little pieces. What is important though is we do have the identical fabric so it all looks like one piece. This is how they're just going to work out as we are stitching them. The most difficult part with these type of projects are keeping the identical fabric onto the fabric beside it. It's very easy to get that mixed up, and then we don't have that proper puzzle look. So I do have a Sew Very Easy way that we're going to be able to do this. But the first thing we're going to need to do is decide how much fabric we're going to need. So for each 5-inch square, we do need 2 puzzle pieces. Now we can get 4 puzzle pieces from one 5-inch square of fabric. So if you like to save fabric, I'd recommend picking up 3 identical packages. If you pick up 3 packages and there's 2 identical squares in each package, we'll have 2, 4, 6 identical squares. So from 2 of them, we're going to be able to get 8, and that's going to give us 4 puzzle pieces to go with our 2 and 4 more to go with our 2. If your charm pack only comes with 1 square and you still have bought 3 packages, you're going to have 1, 2, 3 squares, which means that last one we still can get 4, which is going to give us 2 of our puzzle pieces. That will eventually look like that. I will include a PDF handout that you're going to be able to use. You just need to cut these apart and fuse them on the back of your fabric. There's 15 per sheet. Now I have used the Heat and Bond Easy Print because it can go through my printer. It can only go through an inkjet printer. If it goes through a laser printer, lasers are hot and it will melt your glue. But with the inkjet, you can print on that paper side and you'll have the glue on the back side. So from that Heat and Bond light, I was able to roughly cut out those little pieces, and I ironed them onto my fabric, cut them out, joined 2 pieces with each 5-inch square, and laid them all out. So now that we have these all laid together, we're going to be able to take this right to the sewing machine. Beside your sewing machine, I would recommend setting up a little iron so that you can iron and sew right at the sewing machine. The first thing I'm going to do is put all of these together in 2 patches. So I want to sew my 2 blocks together, but before I sew them together, I need to decide what puzzle piece is going to go on what side. And I'm going to be able to iron that right on. I'm only going to work on this 1 block at a time. I've taken the paper off and I did iron it on that one side. I still have my extra pieces and I'm not going to touch those, and I'm going to be careful I don't iron them by accident. Now I'm going to put this together and sew a 1/4 inch. So here's my setup. I did stitch my 2 blocks together. Now I'm going to be able to just grab 2 more blocks. As I'm working on these, I'm trying to keep the darker to my right-hand side for that very first pile. I still have my puzzle pieces attached to the other squares. Now, sew my 1/4 inch. And I'm going to do a whole chain of them. I'm always going to try to follow the same thing. So in this case, my puzzle piece is always going to be on that bottom fabric. Just make sure your other puzzle pieces are out of the way and stitch. So I'm going to sew all of my squares together in sets of 2, keeping my additional puzzle pieces all together with the squares. So right here at my machine with my little iron, I'm going to take that and I'm going to press the seam so that it is going away from that little puzzle piece. I'm keeping these here. I'm just going to make sure that everything stays out of the way. Now that these are all pressed, I'm going to be able to make a 4 patch. So I can take the top 2 or mix and match them and then take that one and twist it. So now we have puzzle pieces going in the opposite direction. So I need to take one of my puzzle pieces and iron it onto the other squares. These 2 blocks are going in this direction. So the 2 opposite blocks are going to go in this direction. So that puzzle piece will go there. This will go in that direction. So I'm going to iron these pieces on. My seams are opposing. So now I can just bring this right to the machine and stitch and set up 2 more and 2 more and 2 more, and I'm going to chain piece all of these into 4 patches. Once I finish stitching that seam, when I open it up, you can see that all of my puzzle pieces are correct. And I'm going to be able to press those seams so they're going in a circular motion. And when I do that, I'm going to have a little 4 patch in the center, but that's going to help keep those seams flat. I'm going to be able to continue now and sew these together. I have the pieces. I just need to make sure that the pieces are going in the right direction. Now we're going to be able to do this in groups of 4, or if you want, you could sew it in a long row. If you are doing rows of 5, then you're going to need to leave just some singular pieces that you're going to be able to put on the end. And you're going to know that as you draft out what you want. So I'm going to continue to sew my pieces together, press with those seams going in opposite directions. So I always have these little 4 patches on the underside and just keep putting my puzzle pieces in the area where they need to be. This particular quilt, I did start with 64 blocks, which means I was able to do 8 blocks going in one direction and 8 rows, which gave me a good way of doing all of my 4 patches and then putting them together. Because I started with 5 inches, these blocks will end up being a 4.5 inch measurement. So we can keep that in mind when we are doing any measurements, or if we want to decide what size we want to make that's different than this. So all of my puzzle pieces were not mixed up because I always kept them attached onto the block that I was working on, which means I still have some puzzle pieces left over from that outside. And I'm going to add a border. Now this border is 3.5 inches, which means it is going to be 36.5 inches. So I need to somehow put my puzzle pieces on the border, but I'm going to pin them onto the quilt first. So I'm going to remove that back paper, and I know I want my puzzle piece in this area, so I'm going to flip it over and pin it in place. I'm going to do that to all of the blocks where that puzzle piece is now coming out. Once those pieces have been pinned on so the right sides are touching, I'm going to take that border, flip it over, and stitch a 1/4 inch just like we would normally do any border. I did make sure that the pins were not in the way as I was going to stitch my border. Now I can remove those pins, and I have these loose pieces that I'm going to be able to press into my border. So I'm going to do the 2 sides, and the border is going to be 36.5 inches. And when those 2 sides are done, the top and the bottom, those measurements will be 42.5 inches. And you can see where this is now going to finish that puzzle piece. So do all 4 borders. That border with those puzzle pieces really does put a finishing touch on it. However, it's not finished. These little puzzle piece ends still need to be appliqued down. So there's 2 ways we can do it. So we can go to the machine, put on matching thread if we'd like, and applique these little pieces on. I now am going to quilt this and applique it at the same time. Because this is only a 42.5-inch quilt, I am going to be able to do that. If I was going to do a very large quilt, then I would take time and applique these down and then quilt an all-over pattern. But because it is small enough, I'm going to sandwich these pieces together and applique it and quilt it all in one step. I'm going to put my layers together with a fusible batting, and that way I don't have to worry about any pinning or basting. I'm going to be able to just take it right to my domestic machine and work on it. So I'm going to quilt this and applique at the same time. So I'm going to be using a straight stitch and then a zigzag, a straight stitch and a zigzag. I'm just going to be pushing these buttons back and forth as I am doing my quilting. Now this is a computerized machine, so your machine might be a little bit different. You might have a knob, something manual, so be sure to test it out first. So the first thing I'm going to do is that straight stitch. And I did draw a line extending my pattern. And I have a nice big walking foot on. I'm going to do a straight stitch until I come to this puzzle piece. Stop, push my zigzag. So you can see my stitch already changed for me. Turn my quilt, and I'm going to zigzag around that puzzle piece. And I'm going to zigzag right until I get to that line, push my straight stitch, and do 1 stitch. Now straighten up and do my straight stitch right until my puzzle piece. Stop, zigzag, and I'm just going to stop, start, rotate, I come to my seam, stop, straight stitch, 1 stitch, straighten up, and I'm going to continue. So for the quilting, I'm going to stitch the center and go out, and the center and go out, and then on the same side. So I'm always going to start on that center seam and work my way out, and just continue to applique and quilt all at the same time. So you can see the straight stitch, the applique stitch, the straight stitch, the applique. This is saving me 1 step. I didn't have to applique that because I'm quilting it as I go. I'm going to stitch right in the ditch. When I come to my little puzzle piece, I'm going to rotate and then stitch around. And if you're not sure what color to use, gray is a great color because it will look like a shadow. So once I have finished the straight stitch and that zigzag on the machine, I have the entire quilt quilted as we went along. So I have some straight stitches and some zigzags along the back, but it does have a really nice look to it. And the bonus is, all we have left to do is put the binding on. And I will put a link in the description for those little puzzle pieces. Now, if your machine cannot do that zigzag straight stitch back and forth, or you just don't want to quilt this as you go, you can just take time and machine applique those points down, sandwich it together, and just do an all-over pattern. I do love the way those little puzzle pieces come out in the corner, and I also love that it's almost done. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I do have a newsletter, all under Sew Very Easy. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.